Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Tech Collective. And in this episode, Scott and I are going to go deep into subwoofers. How's it going, Scott?
It's good.
I'm glad to hear that. So, you guys will notice in this episode, Scott and I will be changing clothes. That's because we recorded this episode on subwoofers a little bit earlier because Scott is working on an article for Business Insider around bookshelf speakers. Scott, you want to talk a little bit more about that article you have coming up?
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not gonna be swapping clothes, it's just we'll be changing clothes ourselves. Our outfits will look different. Yeah, I'm working on an article for Business Insider. It's all about bookshelf speakers. It's gonna be a buying guide. And in my research and just in talking with you, dipping offline, we talked a lot about like how subwoofers can make a big difference. And I know you're a big advocate of always putting a subwoofer in there to take care of the lower frequencies, which I haven't started my testing yet, but I do know that it makes a big difference. And I'm just curious to see the difference before and after. But I have a lot of questions about subwoofers, so I'm looking forward to getting into it in this episode.
So let's get into our main conversation here around subwoofers. You want to kick us off with the article that you're working on and kind of the way subwoofers are playing into that?
Yeah, well, and I think it's appropriate that we're talking about subwoofers in front of two giant Nakamichi subwoofers that are part of my soundbar setup here. So I feel very well backed up here. Um, We just had a conversation that we recorded about bookshelf speakers, and in that, you said you think that everybody should have a subwoofer, so making it a 2.1 setup, essentially. Um, and I started asking you questions, once we were off the air. I said like, "Well, what should I get for my testing?" I'm doing an article that's gonna be a buyer's guide for Business Insider about bookshelf speakers, and so I'm gonna have maybe 10 or 12 different sets of bookshelf speakers, and they all have different frequency responses. So
Correct.
some are going to get down to like 38 to 40 hertz, and some are only going to get down to like 63 hertz. And there's a big difference in there in what you're able to hear in terms of sub bass and richness and fullness. And
Yeah.
so to make it even, I think I should probably borrow a subwoofer. And so we started talking about brands and sizes and all this stuff. And I thought, wow, this is actually good advice and we should record this. And I don't have an outline when we're doing it. We just sort of talk. So I want to see where this takes us as we talk about subwoofers. So are you ready for me to ask you 101 questions?
Yeah, shoot away. I'll answer them as best as I know. And if we need to Google something, we'll Google it.
All right, sounds good. Um, so the first thing I want to get into size, brand, power, all the stuff that I need to know when I'm trying to find a universal subwoofer. My first dilemma was I know that the names that keep coming up are like KEF, SVS. There's certain names that as I look into like what are some of the best subwoofers, then those ones come up. Now I'm going to be testing speakers from KEF and from SVS, and my hesitancy in using the subwoofers, I didn't want to give an unfair advantage to those speakers. Um, because then it's like, oh, if it's a KEF one, then of course they're going to work well with the KEF bookshelf speakers, and it's not fair to compare those against some other brand of bookshelf speakers with the KEF subwoofer. So, what can you tell me about the first thought of is there such thing as a universal, or is there any validity to this
Yeah.
idea of like that it would play favorites, the subwoofer?
This is a really great question. And actually, pretty much all subwoofers are universal. You can mix and match. When people are putting together their home theater systems or their two-channel systems, typically you want to keep the speakers the same. If you're using, let's say, KEF again, using KEF all around your home theater system, you want to make sure you get their center channel, their surround sound speakers, and put the system together that way. But as far as subwoofers goes, you can get whatever subwoofer you want. And there's dedicated subwoofer companies out there. Like Hue comes to mind. That's HSU. We just talked about SVS. SVS made their name in subwoofers. They're absolutely fantastic. So you got JL Audio and their subwoofers. Most speaker brands will have a subwoofer line, but my experience has been is those are typically a little bit more expensive and the value goes down, but dedicated subwoofer companies that actually make only subwoofers, that's your best bang for the buck. So any subwoofer can work with any set of speakers. The main thing is a subwoofer has, I would say, two main responsibilities. In a system, the subwoofer is going to give you whatever frequency range you're missing. So, wherever you set those crossover points, 60 hertz, 80 hertz, 100 hertz, it's going to cover that frequency range and go down lower than whatever bookshelf or even floor standing speaker is going to be able to do, unless you're just buying a very, very expensive floor standing speaker.
Yeah, I mean, I
But
saw some of these subwoofers are going down to, like, 14 or 20 hertz, like, they're going way down there.
Yeah, and then you get, like, the subwoofers that go, like, ultrasonic below 10 hertz. I mean, these are great. That's, like, kinda that movie theater experience that people want, right? That's that tactile feeling, right? Like, when you're watching something like, Jurassic Park and, you hear that T-Rex stomp and you feel it in your chest, that's what you want the subwoofer for. Um, but since we're mainly talking about, two-channel audio, it it puts more emphasis on having a subwoofer in your system because whether you listen to music or movies, people still want that tactile feeling. So getting back to the two responsibilities, it's got to hit that frequency range that you want it to hit, and it goes down as low as you want it to go. And secondly, it's there to pressurize the room because that's what makes you feel like you're more involved in your music. I use the word tactile, and I'm going to use it quite a lot in this conversation, especially around subwoofers, because that's what most people love. There's even like little subwoofers that people will attach to their sofa. They're typically called butt kickers. And you'll attach those to your sofa so when you're watching a movie or even listen to music, when that kick drum hits or that bass hits in an EDM track, right? You feel it. You want that feeling in your body, in your bones, pushing against your chest. And that's what makes people smile ear to ear. So that's why I'm always saying you always need a subwoofer in your system. And now I'm gonna say my other part here, which we didn't talk about. I was saving it for the show. Is one subwoofer is always better than no subwoofer, and two subwoofers are always better than just one subwoofer. And we can get into that conversation about well, why I think that and why I'll always advocate for multiple subwoofers in a setup, even in a two-channel system. But just jumping off there, talking about universality, you can get whatever company subwoofer you want. It's just a matter of looking at the specs, looking at the design of the subwoofers, and is it going to meet your needs? And what's really great is, and you'll notice this too, as you're switching from different speakers and doing your bookshelf testing on what you like for your roundup and your buyer's guide, is that the subwoofer is going to behave almost the same throughout each one of those setups. It's just what does the speakers do once you get it locked into the room in the right position.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When it comes to subwoofers and bass, there's so many things going through as you speak, and this is what happens in our regular conversations. As you speak, I think of 3 things. So, I was thinking of that scene in Boogie Nights where the guy goes into the hi-fi store and says, "I don't know if I need all that bass." It's like, "Oh, you need all that bass." I think there's some people who just they wanna put literally like a cup of water, like from Jurassic Park, as you mentioned, on the table, and they wanna see that, like, the drop of water going up in the thing and really feel it, and some people are like, I hear bass, it's good bass, that's fine." And for some people, it's like with sugar, it's like there's never such thing as enough bass. Um, and I think that's the subjective end, and I think people can go a little crazy. I know there are things more in the mobile and gaming space where you can like wear things so that it will like vibrate and
Yeah,
whatever. Like people literally want to feel it, not just through the air, but as you said, like through the furniture or on their body. Um, One of the things I want to get into now that we've covered this sort of the branding thing is how do I know what the right size is? There tend to be, it's like 8 inch, 10 inch, 12 inch.
yeah,
There's such a thing as like bigger in theory is always better, but how do I know what the right amount is?
that's a really great question. So it really comes down to how much bass do you like in your room and in your setup, right? If you're just looking to say, hey, I want to supplement the low end in my room, or you may be an apartment, right? You have to consider your living circumstances. You're in an apartment, you're just looking to supplement the low end in your room. An 8-inch subwoofer or 10-inch subwoofer sounds really great. Then, if you're talking about wanting to fill the room up even more and the size of the room, or let's say we move over to a home theater setup and you want to really pressurize that room to where you're getting that tactile feeling, then you kind of want to get bigger in your subwoofers. You want to go as big as you can afford with the right amount of power, and the right amount of positioning in your room. Because one thing people will do is they'll say, "Oh, I only have room for an 8-inch or 10-inch subwoofer." Put it in their room, and actually, it makes the system sound worse because whatever speakers you had, even if they were rolling off at 60 hertz, they were still filling the room better, sometimes even in a better way. And all of a sudden, you set the crossover points, and even though the subwoofer can go lower, it's just not giving you that level of impact and feeling that you have in your room. So my rule of thumb has been like, go bigger, get 13-inch, 15-inch subwoofers at least. If you can get 17-inch subwoofers, go for those. But you can always go bigger and tame the subwoofer down, turn the volume down, play with the positioning, but you can never go up and try to get more output out of the subwoofer. One thing I should always also point out here is kind of like a pro tip here, and probably my biggest pet peeve when it comes to subwoofer specs is don't look for the peak wattage because that is a completely made up number that happens for one frequency range at one point. They'll say, "Oh, it's a peak at 2,000 watts." That's all BS. Ignore it. Make sure you look for whatever the RMS is or the concurrent power that the subwoofer does, so you know how much power is going to the subwoofer and how much their actual output is going to be.
So what's a good figure? I'm looking at RMS and I see something that says 350 watts. Then what does that mean in terms of the size of my room? Let's talk about how do we actually do it? Because
Yeah,
this is where the dynamics are interesting. Uh, different size subs. I think it's sort of like what does the room want and what can the room tolerate? And I don't know if I'm using these terms right, but basically it's like it's great to have a big subwoofer, but in the wrong setup, it could get lost. The sound could get lost because those low bass frequencies act all funny, and it's like there's a non-directionality to them,
correct.
and I want people to understand how to get not just the right size, but like if they're looking to fill the room, then fill the room. It's like you could, I don't know, if you were looking to bail yourself out of a rowboat or something, you could use a thimble or you could use a bucket. And so it's like using the right size thing for the right job.
That is a fantastic question, and this goes back to, my advice that I always give, which is go slow in your setup. Now you can't because you've gotta do this roundup for your article, but typically what I tell people is once you get your speakers that you like, live with your speakers for about a month. See what you like, what you don't like, and see what you're really missing on that bottom end and what you feel like you wanna supplement it with. And then be honest with what you want. Do you just want, more low end frequency in your setup? Then that's going to determine, okay, you can do that with a nice, 10-inch, 250-watt subwoofer or 300-watt subwoofer. Or are you looking to be slapped in the face every time that bass kicks in? Then you want to go larger, right? Those are the type of things you need to be thinking about when you're getting a subwoofer. Your other point on does it get lost in the room and positioning are also valid questions. Now, aesthetically, most people try to put the subwoofer either in the front of the room next to the speakers, or they put it next to in the kind of in the corner of the wall, which it will create a enforcement of the low end that overblows the bass in the room, and then it doesn't mesh together well with the speakers. So you want to think about the placement that you want in the room and the type of impact. So if you have an
But
eight
it's
inch,
not like with the bookshelf speakers we were talking about yesterday, there tends to be a formula and a triangle,
correct,
and with subwoofers, I've heard different people, as with anything, they say different things, but it's like you can point it this way, you can point it that way. You can have it on the front wall, you can have it on the side wall, that the directionality doesn't matter as much, especially if I'm
yeah,
assuming that this is going to be a powered wireless subwoofer. So it will be wireless to the source or wireless to the other speakers, or there's some amount of wireless. So it's not like you couldn't there's a lot more flexibility with where you can actually place it.
Yeah, and I would say wireless. I've had only one experience of wireless subwoofers, and they compress the hell out of the subwoofers. Just I want to throw that out there. I haven't heard a good wireless subwoofer that's been the equivalent of a wired one in any setup. So I want to put that notion out there as well. It is a
Yeah.
compromise. But you're exactly right. Positioning becomes really important. There's something called the subwoofer crawl. And if you're on the forums or you've heard about this before, you'll see the subwoofer crawl is where you put the subwoofer right at the listening position or the seated position. And then you kind of walk around the room to see, where does the bass feel most impactful. And that will tell you the best position in your room for the subwoofer. So if you've got, high ceilings, vaulted ceilings, this is a family room, and you've got, big rooms or maybe a row of windows, right? You may find out that, hey, the subwoofer will look good, to the sofa or the seated area, but then in practicality, there's no way for you to run a speaker wire there, or even if you have a wireless subwoofer, an outlet to plug it in. So you kind of got to play with the positioning around the room. One
Yeah.
thing that's
In my
really
setup here, I have, my subwoofers are very practical. I have it in this sort of Stonehenge setup of, like, they're literally holding up the soundbar because I don't have another piece of furniture in this rental place. So, I wish I could play with it a little bit more because 'cause I'd love to see what happens when I put them out way wider as opposed to this feels like they're too close together to me.
And subwoofers, believe it or not, are actually more sensitive to the room acoustics than are regular speakers because of
Oh,
the nature
interesting.
of what they're trying to do, and they take into account because those sound waves are so powerful they go through walls, right? I mean,
Oh,
that's why I'm talking about apartment buildings here because you may have a subwoofer that sounds great in your room, but guess what? Your neighbor, maybe even two floors down, is like, "What the heck is vibrating in my house?" Because that's what subwoofers can do.
yeah.
So that's where you want to play with the positioning, play with your size of the room. I'm saying go bigger and go more powerful because you can always taper it back. I do want to point out that in a two-channel system, it is a little bit harder to integrate a subwoofer, just because you don't have some of these DSP tools that might be available in a home theater system. Like a lot of receivers have Dirac or Odyssey or some sort of calibration tool. And in a two-channel system, a lot of those integrated systems don't have Dirac or Odyssey control. They're getting more and more ubiquitous now, but they're still far and few in between, and it requires an extra license.
All right, you sparked something there, and I want to get to that. But before we do that, one of the things I want to chat about is sound quality
Okay.
because I think, and this really goes in the whole audio world as far as I'm concerned, in terms of IEMs, headphones, speakers. Um, I it feels like there should be a maxim of, like, more bass is better, but better bass is better. um, there is such a thing as bad bass in the sense of, like, it's muddy, it's bloated, it's not quite as precise. But, like, when people hear loud bass, the first thought is, oh, that's good bass because I can hear it or I can feel it. But as somebody more knowledgeable, what would you say about sound quality? Because I know we were talking
Yeah.
yesterday, I pointed out a particular subwoofer, and in so many words, you said, like, I bet that sounds like crap. And so,
Yeah.
how does somebody know if something sounds like crap as opposed to just like, well, I hear bass, therefore it's good?
Yeah, this is really hard, and this is part of going slow. Is you want to look for subwoofers that have really good flat responses. You'll be able to pull those from a lot of the company websites of how well the subwoofer responds. And then, it goes to say that louder doesn't mean that it's better. You want to listen to how accurate the subwoofer is and how well it reacts to real life situations. So, for example, when you're watching a action movie and there's an explosion and bullets flying everywhere, is does the room just sound like so much noise and your body's shaking? Or can you start to distinguish, like, okay, I hear a bullet sound, I hear a car explosion, I hear footsteps, all those little things tell you the quality of the subwoofer. And same thing on the music side, right? Usually drums is where most people talk about the low end, and bass guitar. It's like, can I hear those notes? So if someone's playing bass, or you're listening to something like a jazz record, or you're listening to an upright bass in from a cello, or any of those type of instruments, like, can I hear all the notes? Do I hear the strings? Do I hear it accurately in the room? Or when there's, going from one note to the next, everything's kind of getting mixed together. And there's a couple of things that could happen for it. It could be one, the quality of the subwoofer, and two, it could be the quality of the room. So it's like, okay, the subwoofer's doing a good job of reproducing that, but because it's bouncing off the back wall and back to the listening area, now you're getting either cancellations in the null, or it's amplifying it to where the other frequencies are getting muddied out. So that's where I talk about subwoofers being very hard to set up, especially because I said this at the start of the conversation, is you want to have two subwoofers. Two subwoofers help you even out the room. It helps you say, okay, if I put a subwoofer a little bit on the left side of the room or the right side of the room, it helps you even out the room so that you're covering it across the entire area, instead of having these like dips and valleys of the frequency range as it's going through the room.
Yeah, a couple of things came up. One is I'm just thinking like when I'm testing headphones, I guess to some degree speakers have a tougher time. It's easier for headphones. I have what I call the Metallica test, which is I play Enter Sandman, and then when the kick drum kicks in, can I hear the distinctive bass line that's playing exactly with the kick drum? And if I can distinguish the bass line, the bass guitar from the kick drums, then I'm hearing good bass. As opposed to if they just sort of blend together, it's like boom, 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 and I can't quite hear the bass
Yeah,
guitar, then that doesn't work. And then the other one is Hotel California. It's such a meme, but the 1994 recording, the live one, um, when the bongo first kicks in, then on some systems it sounds like boom, and on some it sounds like a person in a room hitting a bongo.
yeah,
When somebody hits a bongo, it's not an explosion, it's not Mad Max, it's supposed to sound like a bongo. And so I
right.
know from playing a couple of different things, and then there's like a Billie Eilish track of Bad Guy. I know that there's a lot of bass and sub bass and all that, so I can tell. But for other people out there, other people in our audience, they might not know what to listen for, or what's bad bass. I always equate bass for some reason. My metaphors tend to go with like sugar. Everybody loves things that are sweet, but for everybody, there is such a thing as too sweet. There is such, it's like, oh, I didn't like that. It's like you get a sheet cake from the grocery store. It's like, yeah, that's too much sugar. I didn't want that. I wanted a dessert, not a pound of sugar in my mouth. So
Yeah, that's
I'm
that's a
trying to help
fantastic
people figure out
analogy.
like how do they know when something's not good base? And I think you covered it mostly. Was there anything you wanted to add to that part?
Yeah, I know. I think you got it right. That's a brilliant analogy. I didn't never thought of the cake analogy and sugar, but that's exactly it. If you put too much sugar into whatever you're baking, the cake, and all of a sudden that's all you taste, and you don't taste maybe strawberries or raspberry filling or the rest of the flavors that somebody's put into the cake, and that's where having a subwoofer in the room that can overwhelm the speakers or underperform is a huge challenge in the setup, which is why I say go slow. If you can get several different subwoofers in your system to try them out, that's the best. I mean, obviously, go online, look at reviews. If you go on the forums, there's a lot of people with really great experience that can tell you about how different bases are performing in their setups. That would probably be the best way to go. If you say, my room is, let's say 20 by 20, and I've got X amount of speakers in there, what subwoofers are other people using that they like? That's a really good starting point to narrow down your focus as you're shopping. But at the end of the day, you
Like,
got to get.
I saw something on the sorry to interrupt. I saw
Go ahead.
something on the SVS site that was a subwoofer matcher. It's a tool, and I guess we can put a link in the description. Um, you literally say, "This is what I have. I have," and then whatever brand, and it has a long, like, super scrolling thing of all the different brands. So if you have Klipsch or Bowers and Wilkins or Bang& Olufsen or whatever you have, chances are that brand is in there, and then it says, "And what model do you have?" And then it says, "These are our recommendations for the best 2 or 3, things." And it really does change because I put in actually 2 different I put in the R3 Meta and the Coda W, and it came up with a very different list. So it doesn't just keep putting out the same list. So there are tools out there which helps. But one of the things, there are a few things I want to get into that are things that you see literally in the construction or the controls of the subwoofer
Okay.
that, like, what should we look for? The big one I think is it ported or is it sealed? And so can you talk about porting and air and front porting, rear porting like this? Let's just get into it.
Yeah, so for sealed subwoofers versus ported subwoofers will have more output into the room because they're pushing air into the room, but sealed subwoofers tend to go lower and have better bass extension. Sealed
So that
subwoofer,
doesn't matter where the ports are?
it doesn't matter for placement, right?
Okay.
Because right now we're just talking performance. So on the
Yeah.
performance side, what it's supposed to do is supposed to help with bass extension and getting lower into the room and providing deeper bass. And the sealed subwoofer, because it's a closed box, they can do different engineering techniques to help it get better bass extension and the way they control the airflow and volume inside of that sealed box. Now,
Mm.
as you alluded to on positioning, that's where the big difference comes in. A sealed subwoofer you can place almost anywhere because you don't have to think about the ports on there. But when you have a ported version, then you want to really think about where you're going to put the subwoofer. How is it pointing towards the listening area or the area where you want it to have the most impact? And those type of engineering questions come into mind and setup questions come into mind on what you want to do. And subwoofers that are sealed are really good for apartments, and they typically are what most people will go with. And you'll notice that, like,
Gotcha.
if
So
you,
it's less, um, you're less in danger of offending your neighbors if you have a
a
sealed
little bit.
version, and so you could get decent bass, but if you have the space and the isolation of your own place, then ported is better if you want more bass.
If you want more bass and more output into the room, and sealed for bass extension. And remember, we talked about pressurizing the room. So it's pushing air into the room, helping to pressurize it. But it also means that it can cancel out other frequencies with your speakers in the setup. So that's why you want to make sure you're using some sort of tool to help calibrate it, or an expert who can really help you optimize it in your room. When you're talking about home theater and dedicated home theater setups, that's where it becomes a lot more fun to put in multiple subwoofers. I mean, you can have 4 subwoofers in a setup, 6 subwoofers, and have a really great experience. But what it really helps a calibrator do and an installer do is really fine tune it. And you'll notice, like, it's not like they're putting them in and turning the volume knob up on all of them. Is what they're doing is they're even blockading and saying, okay, these 2 subwoofers, I only wanted to really focus on like 20 hertz to 35 hertz. And these 2 subwoofers, I want to go from 20 hertz and below. And you can really hone in on what the subwoofer's doing, what their responsibilities are, and how they balance out the room. But it involves, more equipment or more sophisticated equipment in the home theater setup to do that. The results are absolutely fantastic, right? That's where you feel like you're listening to a piece of music and you're live and it's a private concert right in front of you, and you don't have that same problem where there's a ringing in your ear after like 5 minutes. You're just enjoying yourself in the moment, and you get a nice balanced room. One thing I should also point out is that on some of the subwoofers, you're going to have to test this out yourself, but based off of the volume levels you like to list at, in our previous conversation with bookshelves, I talked about pulling out an SPL meter to see at what volume level you actually like to listen. Some subwoofers won't perform well at low volume levels. They want things to be cranked up a little bit. And sometimes these sensors that the subwoofers have for auto turn on won't even kick on because your volume level is too low. So those are the type of things you need to consider and think about on these subwoofers.
Yeah, the last thing you wanna do is, like, spend $600 on a 10-inch subwoofer and then get it back and be like, "What?" Like, you shouldn't have to lean in to hear hear or feel the subwoofer. I know when you were talking about the bass, it made me think of I was at a Nakamichi demo. This is their shockwave system, but the Dragon was crazy. It was 4 subwoofers, so it was like an 11.4.6
Oh, wow.
system, and there were 2 cabinets, and the subwoofers were set up, I think the term is ISO, where one was pointed this way, one was pointed that way,
Okay.
and they crossed over each other so that they could be more spacious in the sound they put out. And in that system, you can choose how many and which of those 4 subwoofers you turn on in the 2 different cabinets. And I found that past 3 was too much. Like, we were actually listening to Hotel California, we watched the Mad Max clip that everybody shows in those sorts of things, and, I mean, other than being impressed in the Atmos that they had in this hotel room, um, the bass really just, like, knocked me over. I mean, it literally I was sitting there and I was, like, knocked back, and there's actually a special tie-in because when I heard that soundbar, the Dragon, they had just introduced it. I was one of the
Wow.
very first people in the world to hear it. There was only one other person. Guess who the other person was who heard it right before me?
I'm gonna guess
Caleb
Caleb.
Dennison. Yeah, he was the only it's like, "Hey, you're the second person in the world to hear this. Wow, who was the other person?" "Caleb." I'm like, "Ah, Caleb." You know, like, he was
He's
one step ahead of me.
he's
Um,
everywhere.
yeah, so all that to say, I think there's everybody has an amount that's like enough and too much. But what that story means to me is like there you can dial in exactly which subwoofers and how much the level. So like, would I rather have uh, 4 subwoofers at 75% or 3 at 90%? Or, like you can totally play with those sorts of things. But from a practical standpoint, what I've noticed as I've been shopping around for these subwoofers is that there are a lot of interesting things on the back. I'm looking at the KEF and the SVS, and you can actually dial in exactly what you want the crossover to be and different stuff. So, do you want to talk about some of that stuff of like what's on the back?
Yes, so we can go into more detail on individual products if we're going to cover those. But as a general sense, you want to look at, again, the level of control and integration, right? Kef puts a lot of the controls on the back of their subwoofers. The biggest knock I have against them is they do have a control app, but the only time you can use that to calibrate your subwoofer is if you have a Kef product. So I think you said you were getting the Coda Ws, right?
Yeah,
So you should be able to do it. But if you don't have a Kef product, then you have to use the manual controls on the back of the CAFs to set the crossover points that you might need, the volume gain that you might need. And then they have some DSP settings on the back that allow you to set it up whether you're in an apartment or you're putting the subwoofer in a corner. And their subwoofers are stackable as well. We haven't had that conversation yet, but the
yeah,
CAF subwoofers are stackable. So if you want to get two, three, four, however many of those you want, stack them in a row, it's just going to give you better bass output and more volume and headroom. But you can do that as well. And on the SVS side, I know we mentioned them a lot more. They have their own dedicated app that you don't need to have an SVS product for. It just connects right to the app, and you're able to help calibrate it, set the volume control. The reason that becomes really important is because then you don't have to get up and go to the subwoofer every time. With the
yeah.
app and the volume control, you just sit in your listening area and then you start adjusting the frequency range that you want, the crossover points, the gain to really hone in on how you want to listen. But that's after you've got everything else set up and you've got the speakers and subwoofers in the position you want them.
I'm leaning more as we talk, I'm leaning more and more towards the SVS. It just seems like it's the more, I don't know, the more universal one, the more because in my particular case, I need it to work with a lot of different things, and so it seems like it makes more sense. I would say
Yeah.
probably the most thing we're glossing over. The biggest thing is you want to make sure in your setup that there's a sub out port because if you can't connect your sub to your system, then that's the end of that conversation. So there's
That's
usually is it RCA? It's like something that looks like RCA to me. That's a port on the back of your receiver or maybe on the back of your system. I don't know if TVs have those?
TVs rarely have like subwoofer outs. They're usually optical out to a device, if they're not using HDMI AR. But yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a really good point. So there's two types of ways that the subwoofer out will work on a setup. And a lot of home theaters, it will be a dedicated LFE channel, and then you have to put the subwoofer into LFE mode. And so
What
that's a
is
very
LFE?
low frequency extension.
Oh, okay.
So you need to just put in LFE mode. And then as there's the RCAs, which are just like the red and white, that are like audio outputs, and you can use those to go into the subwoofer. And that gives the subwoofer, meaning you have to kind of do a little bit more manual control in the subwoofer, whereas the LFE is a little bit more plug and play. Your receiver has an LFE output, your subwoofer has an LFE setting on the back of the subwoofer. You plug it in, you turn on the LFE, and then all the settings are controlled through the receiver or the processor, and you change everything inside of that unit. As opposed to when you do a RCA, you have to do a little bit more manual control on the subwoofer or through the app.
Okay. So this conversation is already being helpful to me. I hope it's as helpful to our audience as it is to me, because I think like, oh, I don't want to get a subwoofer that's too big. Like if I can get away with an 8-inch subwoofer or a 10-inch, then why would I get a bigger one? And now I'm thinking might be bigger. Headroom is a big thing that people say. You mentioned it earlier, meaning that you can always have a bigger one that you have the volume down a little bit, but you can't make a smaller one go
Bigger.
bigger than it is, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just looking. So I was just looking on CAF right here. I'm thinking you probably want, if you're going with SVS, I'm thinking you probably want the SB3000. The sealed SB just means sealed. Subwoofer a 13-inch one. We got it at a 95% CE critic score right now, so that's a pretty great sub. I think
Okay.
you can get away with a sealed 1000 Pro, but I think it might be too small. Just want to, like I said, give you that headroom, give you a little bit of room to play with. I apologize in advance for your back because that's a pretty hefty subwoofer, and moving it around is going to take a little bit of effort, but I think it'll be worth it.
But it's interesting that you're mentioning sealed now because you had me thinking that ported was the way to go.
But you're in an apartment, so I'm being.
No, it's a house. I mean, it's a small house that's all on its own, and
Oh, it's on
I'm
its
not
own.
looking yeah, I'm not looking to piss off my neighbors, but it's like there's nobody above or below me or to the sides other than, like I can see my neighbor's house like 15 feet away, but
Oh, then
I
yeah,
haven't had
then
any complaints so far.
okay, then yeah, then definitely get the ported ones. So I
Okay.
think yeah. For some reason, I kept thinking you were in an apartment. My apologies.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here seasonally, and so I might have referred to it as like back at the house, back at the apartment, like it's the same thing. But I lucked
Okay.
out and got this place that's a block from the beach, and I wish I
Oh,
could stay
lucky.
longer.
Um,
So what else do we need to talk about? I feel like we got through a lot of questions. I've got my questions. I mean, you mentioned stacking, and I did see because anytime there's a thing, there's an accessory. I saw that there were like subwoofer stacking stands and things like that. So um, let's just go into that just a little bit. Like, what's the 30-second version of why somebody would want to stack or to not stack, or why can't certain subwoofers stack?
Yeah, pretty much you can stack any subwoofer, right? It's just Kef has a very dedicated mount for doing it. But subwoofer stacking just means that you're putting one subwoofer on top of the other. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you more output into the room, usually around plus 6 dB, depending on how many subwoofers and the amount. And it just gives you more impact. One of the things we talk about with positioning, and I think this is what's going to blow some people's minds away in this conversation, is that a lot of people put subwoofers on the floor. You know, 99% of the time, you look at pictures, you look at setups, everyone has their subwoofers on the floor. But one of the biggest improvements for subwoofer sound is when you elevate it off the ground, the same way with bookshelf speakers. So when you look
Hmm.
at dedicated home theater systems that are done by professionals who really know what they're doing, is you'll notice they'll have in-wall subwoofers. Sometimes they'll have them a little bit low to the ground, and then they'll put some higher up in the room. And the reason they're putting it higher up in the room is because that's how they're balancing out on the different planes in the room to make sure they're not getting cancellations. So for me, like, I have my subwoofers on the ground right now in my home theater setup. When I had the KC92s in for review and I was able to stack them, it made such a huge difference. So then I just got a small little box to put it on the subwoofers on to elevate them, and they were probably about a foot off the ground. And it made an even bigger improvement in my room because the subwoofers are behaving quite differently from when they were on the floor. So there's so much nuance into where you put the subwoofer, not just on the floor and around the room, but how high elevated it can be as well.
So would it be, you're saying like on the floor is the default and not as good. So are there stands for subwoofers that are literally just a few inches up? I mean, I've seen so many different stands and things in part of my research. So are we talking about like, um, would it be worth it to get a stand that's like up? And I'm guessing, would it be tilted? Would it be angled or would it just be up a little bit?
Usually it's up a little bit. I don't think on the floor is bad, by the way. I just want to make sure I'm clear about that. Like putting it on the floor is the way most people do it, and you can have
It's just the default and people aren't putting thought into it. So,
exactly. But elevating it, if you there's things like isoacoustics that will raise them, right? There's like little
oh,
wood
right.
wood blocks that will raise them a little bit off the ground, and they'll start to decouple the subwoofer from the floor. All right. That's why you see specialized subwoofer plinths that also go under there. It's just to help decouple it from the floor. Then you're getting to even more advanced setups with your subs and how it integrates. But now to do that, you're already so deep into what you like and what you want
Yeah.
that you kind of have a strategy and play what's going to happen there. There's also, like I mentioned, REW in our previous episode, but you want to make sure that you measure your room and you see if there's any sorts of anomalies. And subwoofers behave very differently, not just on what's in the room, but what's behind the drywall, right? Like
Hmm.
there's special rock wool insulation and things like that, which help tame subwoofers inside of rooms. You'll see bass traps that people put in the corner because that's what can amplify low end frequency. But those are the type of things that also have a really big impact on subwoofer quality and where you're sitting. So multiple subwoofers, if you have a home theater where you have multiple rows of seating, that's where multiple subwoofers becomes even important because if you have big like Valencia seats in a row in front of you and then you're sitting in the second row, that Valencia can absorb some of that low end frequency before it even hits you. So you want to have a second subwoofer in the room that helps balance things out.
So
Those are the
that's
type
where having an actual elevated one would probably be a great idea.
correct.
So, so you mentioned bass traps in the corners. What is that? Is that an accessory? Is that just like have some plants in the corners? What are bass traps?
Oh, great question. Bass trap for acoustical treatment, right? Like putting acoustical panels on the wall. There's something called bass trap that look like triangles that sit in the corners of your rooms. And what they do is they absorb the low frequency so they're not bouncing back into the room. Because usually they hit the corners and they start pinging back and forth. Not just
Mhm.
bass, but really like a lot of frequencies. But bass tends to have the worst output out of that. So they bounce in those corners of the rooms and they really push things back out that can really mess up the sound. So, you can do a lot of different things to put in um, items in the corners of your room that can help attract or reduce the amount of bass. So for me, we have bean bags in our basement for our kids. And when my kids aren't there, I just stack the bean bags up in the corner in one spot where I know the bass is a little bit too active for me. And it just
Yeah.
takes it away and it helps and makes the room sound better.
Okay. So I think just to wrap things up, let's go through because one of the things you talked about is to buy slow. Obviously, you're very into the research and all that. So as people are buying slow, where does the subwoofer fit into the buying process? Like in the life of the buying chain, what would you say? Like if you have a let's pretend that I'm in a situation where I have a dream subwoofer that's maybe I don't know. I've seen them very expensive. Like subwoofers can be in the thousands of dollars.
They are.
So in my mind, something when I think subwoofer, that's a good one that you're starting to spend five or $600. So how much would you expect to spend for a starter subwoofer? and where would you put that in the buying chain?
So the buying chain, let's answer that question first. It's after you bought your speakers that you really love and you've lived with them for like a month, right? You bought the speaker that you like and you got the proper amplification for the speaker that you like so that your mids and your highs and even your mid bass on that speaker sounds the way you want it to sound and sounds great. After you live with it for a month, then you decide what kind of subwoofer you want. And then you go through all those questions we talked about, right? Sealed versus ported subwoofers, the size, as well as the amount of impact you're looking for in the room. And part of that process and that dollars that you're spending, you can spend more on a subwoofer than you can a speaker. That's how important having a proper subwoofer can be. But I think $500 to $600 is probably your starting point to get a really good, decent subwoofer. I think they start to hit their stride right around the $2,000 range of where you really get amazing subwoofers for really good value. Once you start to go to, I will say about $5,000 and above, that's where I think the laws of diminishing returns sort of kick in, right? I'd rather have two very good, like 2,000 or $2,500 subs than one $5,000 sub, right? It solves so much more of my problems. One, I get the
Oh,
multiple
interesting.
subwoofers like I like, and it gives me the better subwoofer. So, think about it like that. And I'm going to constantly talk about multiple subs in the room because that is where you really feel the impact of having proper low end.
That just that seems like it's getting into a range where, like, I feel uncomfortable with a lot of those numbers, but it sounds like what you're implying is that if you had, because you said 2 $2,500 subwoofers, there's better than a 5,000 potentially, in terms of having the impact immediately. So it seems like it would be very similar for if I start off with a $600 subwoofer, then before I get up to a 1,500 or a 2,000, it would be better to add a second 600 and then
Yes.
see how that is.
Yeah, you'll realize that that can actually might even smooth out the room, might fix some of the problems you're facing and the level of impact you're looking for in the room, right? And then once you start to upgrade, yes, there's better components, better drivers, better engineerings, as you go more expensive. To me, up to about $5,000, that's where you see the biggest jumps as you're going. And that's where you want to kind of decide on how much you want to invest in the subwoofer integration inside of your system and setup.
Yeah, I mean, at the point I need to buy a car soon. So at the point where I have to start deciding, do I buy a subwoofer or a car, then it seems like it's that's how I frame it. So I
Fair
like
enough.
that you're framing it like this of it's helping to frame this in the conversation about like how I can picture my journey going with subwoofers. And it's different for me because I'm going to be borrowing them, sitting in the back and all that. Hopefully not hurting my back too much in the process. But I hope that the audience has found this helpful because I learned a lot, and I think that you put a lot of good information out there, and it was really good. I'm glad that we recorded this so that we can refer back to it, and it can hopefully help other people out there.
I appreciate it. I mean, this is always an interesting conversation to have because it's one area that is so sensitive to the audio setup that I don't think people realize all the nuances. And like I said, you can make a really good sounding two-channel system all of a sudden sound extremely poor, or you can sound a mediocre two-channel system and make it sound amazing by doing proper subwoofer integration. So that's where I think if you take your time, research what you're looking for, be honest on what you like, where you want the subwoofer to integrate in your system, and then take a look at the room that you're putting it in. Make sure the room is appropriate for the size subwoofer you want, and then you just have fun trying different things and setting things up, and you'll get the impact and the experience that you're looking for.
That's great. I for me, I've always advocated for I'd rather have a slightly smaller TV and have a great audio system. It just makes it feel bigger. So then you have an audio system where the more subwoofer you can get in there, it has a bigger impact on the audio, which has a bigger impact on the whole experience. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's important because I think people start with like, what's the biggest TV I can afford? As opposed to thinking about the whole system, and that's our job here at the Tech Collective, is to think about the whole system.
It is. And one thing I always tell people, and you brought up, your dream system, I always tell people to start off with their dream system. And then you can slowly buy the components that you want. Because the minute you start to compromise on what you want, right, then everything else is just going to continue to fall short. So as long as you know, like, hey, if I'm going to spend $1,200 on a subwoofer and I know I'm going to buy two $600 subwoofers in the process, well, buy the first $600 subwoofer and live with that until you can afford to upgrade to buy the second one, right? Enjoy the system that you have and enjoy the process and the learning process. And then once you start to get these things in your room and your home, you're going to realize that, hey, the final experience that I want, these pieces of gear either hit it, exceed it, or if they don't, then you know exactly what to look for in the next piece of gear. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that pre-recorded episode. It's something new for me and Scott. We're trying to get faster at putting these out. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation about subwoofers and you found it helpful.
I definitely found it helpful because I had a lot of burning questions and you answered them all. And I feel like there's not more that I could know about subwoofers, although I'm sure there is. So I hope you enjoyed watching this episode. Definitely be sure to like and subscribe and leave us some comments below. Do you still have any questions? Did we not cover something? And how important is bass to you?